Hi guys, welcome back to Improve 10x. Let us continue with the series of problem solving using test-driven development. So, today we are going to solve a new problem using TDD, which is name inverter. So, before deep diving into the solution, let us understand the problem. As we have already seen what a TDD is, this picture represents the various phases in test-driven development. So let's jump into the question first. So name inverter. As the name suggests, given first and last name, we just have to invert them. So for example, if we pass input as first last, then the output must be last comma first. Similarly, if the input string has some honorifics, honorifics are nothing but the salutations that we give. So like Mr., Mrs., Miss, etc. The output must ignore the honorifics. So as you can see in the second example, though it is given as Mrs. first last, the output is ignoring the honorific and the output simply says last comma first. Also, we are going to deal with post nominals. Post nominals are nothing but the degrees that usually are at the end of the name. For example, if a person has a PhD, then if the input is first space last space PhD, then the output or the expected output must be last comma first, and the post nominal must stay at the end, which is PhD comes there just like that. So let us try and see how we can solve this problem using TDD. So I'm just switching to the editor. So as usual, we have to initially start with the test. So I'm creating a new package and I am naming it as name inverter. Inside this package, I'm creating a class called name inverter test. I'm adding it to Git. So we are also using Git to commit and push our changes. Basically, it's the repository. So as usual, we have to start with a test that does nothing just to make sure our environment is all up and running. So I'm adding a test annotation here, and public void nothing is my first test case. And let me run the test suite. Okay, done. Good. Now, let us start writing the next test case. So, here, before we jump on to the test case, let us write an example. What is the input and what is the output? So, initially, if we just pass empty string, okay? So, input string, if this is equal to empty, what is the expected output string? It is also empty. So, we are going to write test case for this particular case. So, we have already annotated with test and then public void. So what are we going to do here? Given empty string, we are going to return empty. Right? So for that, first of all, we need to create a class, right? So I am calling the class as name inverter. Say space name inverter object is equal to new name inverter. So yes, it's a red flag. So we are going to create the same name inverter inside name inverter package, which is correct. Okay, let's not do it here. Let's do it in SRC. Let me delete it. So let me create a class. So the target destination directory is not in test, guys. So we have to select src. Okay. So src Java COM input NX name inverter. So this is going to be the destination package. So all the source code remains there and all the tests remain here. Done. Once this is complete, so using this object, I am going to call a method which is invert name. That is my method, and I'm going to pass empty input string. So what is the expected output? It's of definitely of the string data type, and I will say inverted name is equal to this. Again, we have a compilation error, so let's go and fix that. So I'm creating a method called invert name, and here I'm going to rename as name, and that's it. Yeah, so by default it's returning null. Well and good. Now let's go and assert equals. So the expected is an empty string and the original output is inverted name, right? So let's import this. Okay, that's also done. Let's run this particular test case. I'm going to run the entire suite. So as expected, this is failing. So the expected is an empty string, but we are actually getting null, right? So let's go back to our code and check what is happening. So here the default is returning null. So let's check for the name. If name dot equals empty, then I'm simply going to return empty string. Done. So let me rerun the test suite. Cool. Done. So let's continue with the next test case. So before writing the test case, I am simply going to also explain what is our next test case. So here, let us consider where the word is the input name is a single word. So for example, it says just name. So it doesn't have a first and a last name, right? So here the output must also be the same name itself. Done. Right. So let us write test case for that. Let us see what is the import here, api.test, right? Yes. Okay. So here public void. What are we going to name? So given single word, or you can also say one word, it is going to return the same. Return single word. Done. Now, again, we are going to create an object of name inverter class. So since this particular step is being repeated in every test case, let us move it into a separate method, which is called @before each. So in before each, if we write, you can write code which is generally used for setup. So let us simply create this particular object here itself. So this is nothing but refactoring, guys, right? So I'm going to declare an object here, and I'm going to initialize it in before each. Done. Yeah, so this simplified one line here. So I'm going to continue with our test case, which is inverted name is equal to name inverted is the name of the object dot invert name, and here I'm going to pass name, and as usual I'm going to assert name and the inverted name. Done. Now let's go ahead and rerun the test suite. Yes, as expected, it is failing. Now let's go back to the logic. Yes, so here we are checking only for empty string, right? So what if, so it has a single word. So first of all, I am going to just put in braces. Yes. Else if, yeah. So we are checking for a case where there is only a single word, right? So how can we check if there is a single word or not? So we have to check that there are no more than one words, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll simply say if name dot contains, and I'm going to check for space, right? So if it contains space, it means that there are more than one words. So if it does not contain space, it means that there is a single word, right? So I'm just going to add a negation here. So the name does not contain single space character. Then I'm going to simply return name itself. So that's it. Let me go and rerun the test suite. Wow. Yes, that passes. Now, let us go back and write another test. What if there is a single word, but there are spaces at the beginning or at the end? Let's write test case for that. So I'm just going to write another test case given single word, but with spaces. You can write like with trailing spaces. Okay. Beginning or trailing spaces. You can take anything as an example. So since this is trailing spaces, I'm going to add a few more spaces here, and then, but still the expected should just be that single word, right? So I'm going to rerun the test case. Yeah, obviously it is failing because what is happening in our logic? If it does not contain spaces, we are returning name. But since it is containing spaces, this else if condition is failing. This is where we have to, before we check whether there are spaces in that single word or not, we need to trim it, right? So this is where we need to trim that input and then check for spaces. What will trim function do? It will just remove the spaces at the beginning and at the end. Okay, now let us rerun. Okay, now what is happening? Expected is name. Actual you got as name. So we have to return the name that is trimmed, not the original name. Yeah, that's perfect. So it is working for this test case also. So just to check whether it is working for spaces at the beginning, let's write another test case. There are no limit on the number of test cases we are going to write. So I will simply write beginning spaces, and I'm going to give spaces at the beginning also. This time I'm expecting it to pass right away without any fixes. Correct. Done. So single word is done. Now, what could be the next test case? The obvious test case is the one with two words, right? So I'm going to write test public void given two words. So given first, last, it must return last and first, or return inverted name. Done. So I'm going to declare a variable for storing this inverted name, which is equal to name inverter dot invert name, and this time I'm going to pass first space last, right? And what is expected, guys? So it should be last comma first. This is the expected output. You can see from the slide here. So this is the expected output, last comma first. Done. And I'm comparing this with the inverted name. So let's rerun the test suite. Obviously, this should fail. Good. Now let's go back to our logic here. Right. So this particular condition is checking if it has a single word, right? So obviously to handle the case where it does not contain a single word, which means it's more than one word, in that particular case, what do we need? So let's say you're getting first and last, only two words, right? Then you have to simply return the last comma first. But since this name is a string, the input is completely in one string, right? So we need to first split that name into multiple parts. So how do I split it? Any guesses? How do I split it? So I'll simply take a string array and I'll say names, that is equal to name dot, before splitting let us trim so that if there are any extra spaces it's going to remove all of them, dot split. And how am I going to split? Here I can use a regular expression. So whether there are one spaces or more than one spaces also, I just have to split it using the spaces. So I'm using this regex where I am splitting it based on the spaces. So if there are one or more spaces, then it is going to split the following word into the next element, right? Done. Once we get all this into a names array, so names will contain something like this. After the splitting, it will contain first, comma, last, right? Now, this is how names array contains, right? This is what it contains. Now from here, what do we have to return? We have to return names of one because we wanted last, right? And then we need a comma and a space, and then we need a names of 0, right guys? So this is how we have to do it. Now since every branch in this if has a return, we don't have to have this return null, so I'm going to delete it. Then let's rerun the test suite and check if the test cases are passing. Good. So I'll delete this example also. Done. Now let us go back to the test. So what is the next test? So we have checked with empty string, we have checked with single word, and we also checked with multiple words and with spaces inside the between the words as well, right? Now what could be the next test case? So as you can see in the question, the input should also be able to accept honorifics, which are Mr., Mrs., Miss, etc. Right? But however, the output must ignore these honorifics. So let us write a test case and test our code for the same. So let us go back to our test case and start writing this test public void. So given honorifics, I simply have to ignore the honorifics. So I am going to take a variable of string data type to save the output by name inverted name, name inverter, dot invert name. So the input here would be something like this, Mrs. dot first space last. Done. And I need to assert what is the expected output here. It should be last comma first, comma space first. Done. So let us go ahead and run the test suite. Since we did not write the code yet, it should fail. So now let us understand what to do to handle this particular logic. right? So here we are splitting using space, isn't it? However, this branch is hit when there are more than one word. So what we will do here is, usually the first word is this honorific, which is Mr., Mrs., or Miss, etc., right? So whenever there's an honorific, we need to remove that honorific. So we need to remove it from the list of names that are already present after the split is done, right? So since we cannot perform any removing or adding operations on a string array, let's change this data structure to an array list. So what I'm doing is I'm simply changing this to array list of string, and let me import this data structure. And once this is done, new array list of string. Okay, this is also right. However, the output of name.trim.split is nothing but a like an array, right? It's an array, string array. So I need to convert that string array into list. So that is the reason I'm using this particular function, which is arrays.asList. Done. Now we have all the names in an array list. The splitted names are in array list, and now there are some errors as well. So the accessing must be changed. I need to update it to get of 1 and get of 0. Okay, done. Now whenever there's an honorific, we need to ignore or remove that honorific, right? So for that, let us write what we have to do. First of all, if when can you say that an honorific exists? Basically, when it is at the starting of that particular word, right? So if names dot get of 0, this particular, the first word, if that matches, what should it match? It can be Mrs. dot, or it can be Mr. dot, or it can be Miss. So if it is any of these three words, Mr., Mrs., or Miss, then I am going to say that it is an honorific, right? So this is when I will remove the honorific. So how can I remove the honorific, guys? What can I do? So before going to the next step, it should also match another condition. What is that? It should also, the size of names must be greater than 2. Done. When the size of names is greater than 2, and also if the first word matches either of these Mr., Mrs., Miss, then it means it's an honorific, right? So then I'm going to remove this honorific. How can I remove? Simply, I can say names dot remove of 0. Done. Okay. Now I'm done with my coding. So let's just go ahead and run the test suite. Yes, good. It is passing. So we will write another test case with Mr. this time. Given Mr. honorifics, it just has to ignore that honorific. Let us rerun the test suite. Done. It is done. Now let's go back to the code and see if some refactoring can be done. If you see, there is a lot of code in this else branch, isn't it? But all we are doing here is removing the honorific. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to extract this lines of code into a new method. So I'll say extract method, and what am I doing here? Remove honorifics. So whether that honorific is there or not, all that logic is kept in remove honorifics method itself. Done. So let's rerun the test suite because we have done some refactoring. Let us make sure that all the tests are running as expected. Good. Now let's go ahead and go to the next test case, which is dealing with post-nominals. So what are post-nominals, guys? The degrees that we have, like MSc or MTech or PhD, usually are given at the end of the word. Like you can see that in the last example, right? First space last PhD. What is happening? The output is last comma first, and the PhD that remains in the same place. So these post-nominals, they stay where they are, or they stay at the end. Now, let us go ahead and write test case for the same before we jump into the actual coding part. So, given post nominals, what must happen? They should stay at end. So, I am just writing that in the test case name itself so that it represents what we are doing. String inverted name is equal to name inverter dot invert name. This time it's going to be something like this: first space last space MSc dot. Done. And what is the expected output here? We should assert last comma space first, and we need to compare that with the inverted name. So let's go ahead, rerun the test suite. Wow, it passed without any changes to be done. Interesting. So the problem is with our test case itself. We have to assert last comma first and then space MSc. This is what the expected output must be. So there's a small mistake in our test case itself. I'm correcting it and rerunning the test suite. Done. As expected, it is failing. Now let us go back to our source code, the production code, and check where the necessary changes are to be made. Right. Now, after removing the honorifics, whatever names we are getting, the operation must be made on this particular names, isn't it, guys? So the changes are to be made in this particular else block itself, right? So once we remove the honorifics, we have to deal with the post nominals. So after removing the honorifics, if the length is again greater than 2, it means that there are post nominals present in the input string. So we're just going to check if names dot size is again greater than 2. It means there are post nominals, right? So in that case, I am going to save that particular string into a variable by name post nominal, and I'll use a ternary operator here. So if this is true, it means the post nominal exists, right? So what I'm going to do is names dot get of 2. In that particular index, the post nominal exists. Otherwise, I'm simply going to assign an empty string to post nominal, and at the end, I'm going to append a space and the post nominal as well. Now let me rerun the test suite. Okay, now there is some ripple effect which we can see here. There are multiple test cases that are failing. Let's go ahead and see any one test case. So if you see the output expected and actually looks similar, but let me select and see if there are some extra spaces. Correct. So in the actual output, there is an extra space after first. And why was that introduced? It is because of this extra space in line number 16. So only if the post nominal exists, we need to add this space. Otherwise, the space that is added must be removed before we return. So what I'm going to do to solve this problem is I'll simply trim whatever output I'm getting before returning. Done. Yes. Now all the tests are passing. Well and good. Now let's go back and write another test case which has more than one post nominal. So I'll say multi-post nominal as a test case name. So here, let's say this person has done both MSc and also PhD. Done. So they still must remain at the end. So this is the expected output, right? Simply, I will run the test suite. Okay, as expected, it is failing because PhD is also expected. However, we have appended only get of 2, right? So only MSc is coming. So here in this line, in line number 15, if postnominal exists, we are only appending the first postnominal, which is at index 2. But we need to append all the possible, I mean, whatever postnominals have passed in the input, we have to append all of them. So when we wanted to repeat the similar action multiple times, what do we need? Definitely we need a formula. So for that, int I is equal to, so where are these post nominal starting, guys? At which index? It is at index 2. So I'll start from index 2 and I'm going to continue until names dot size and I plus plus. Done. Now whatever string post nominal is there, I need to append, right? String post nominal is plus equals names dot get of I, right? But can we do this here? The declaration must be outside, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is I will simply copy and declare this post nominal string outside by giving an empty string, and I'm going to append all the possible post nominals whichever are coming in line one after the other with a space in between. Done. So I don't need this post nominal. However, this should happen only when the names dot size is greater than 2, right? So I'm going to put all this in an if condition. If names dot size is greater than 2, only then I'm going to execute this for loop. So I can remove this right away. So all the post nominals, MSc, PhD, everything gets appended here. Yeah, this looks good. Let us go ahead and run it. Great. So all the tests are passing. We have covered all the test cases. Now let us go and look and do some refactoring because the code has become huge. Can you see this else block, guys? It's become lengthy, right? So all that particular code which is dealing with post nominals, let us move to a different method. So you can simply say get post nominal. That is the method, right? If the post nominal is there, it will add, otherwise it will simply be empty. Good. Now here, if names dot size is greater than 2, okay, this looks good. We can do little more refactoring here. Instead of sending the whole names, we just need the list of post nominals, isn't it, guys? So what we'll do is we will send a sublist starting from index 2 until the names dot size. And yeah, since this is a list, let me also change the input parameter from array list to list here. Let me import it Okay, done. Here we have, so you don't have to check for the size anymore. Let me re reformat the code. And here, now since it is only passing the list of post nominals, the index can start from 0. You don't have to start it from 2. I will say, instead of names also, I will say post nominals list. Okay, I'm going to use this variable everywhere. Okay, done. Since we have made some changes in the code, let us rerun the test suite once again. Okay, good. All the tests pass. But if I see this else block has still a lot of code. So since I am dealing with multiple words here, what I'm going to do is I will extract all these lines of code into another method and say format get formatted name. Done. So this get formatted name, or I think it makes more sense if we say that there are going to be more than one words in this, right? So I'll say format multi-element, which means more than one. Multi-element name. Done. So in this format multi-element name, initially we are splitting it into an array list, and then we are removing the honorifics if the honorifics exist, and then we are dealing with the post nominals. Finally, we are returning the output. So if we see, this invert name simply has only 3 branches in the if condition. So if the name is empty, then it's going to return empty. If it is having a single word, then it is going to return single word. So instead of telling name trim contains space, we will simply move this into another method and say is single word. Right? If it is a single word, then we are simply returning name.trim, else we are returning the format multi-element name method. We are calling that particular method. Okay. Yeah, I think this looks good. So you can do much more refactoring, guys. For example, here names.get of 0.matches of whatever Mr., Mrs. and Mrs. there. You can extract this also into one method and say has honorifics. So you're checking if it has honorifics, and if the size is greater than 2, then only you are removing the honorifics, else nothing. Yeah. Let us rerun the test suite after all these changes. Okay, all tests passed. Good. Let's go back to the test. Now let us do one integration test which takes a combination of all the inputs which is given. You can simply say integration test here, guys, and string inverted name is equal to name inverter dot invert name. This time let us give a combination of everything. So you can say Mr. dot Bob Martins PhD dot Let us take something like mtech dot space phd. So now what is the expected output? What should we assert it with? We have to get Martins, comma, space, Bob, comma, mtech dot space phd dot. So this is the expected output, guys. So let's compare it with the actual output. Let us run the test suite. If it passes for this particular use case, it means it passes for anything. Wow. It, yes. So all the test cases are passing. So this is how we can incrementally build our algorithm. And if you check, this is the main algorithm, guys, to invert the name. So we have reformatted the code and moved different parts of the code into different methods so that they are simple to understand and they are much more meaningful when it comes to names or what kinds of tests are covered to make sure that your code is working for all the possible test cases. Yeah, that's it for this session. Let's connect in the next session with one more example. Thank you. Have a great day.